بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Alhamdulillah, this is the second class on the Fitra, using this book, which is a book that I wrote several years ago. I guess no copies came? Allahu Akbar. We were hoping to have copies here for sale tonight, but we don't have them. I'm very sorry. Let's review some of what we talked about last time in the first class. And we began by giving a preliminary definition of Fitra. And we pointed out that Fitra is Ismul Hay'a. It is a particular type of nominal or noun in Arabic, like Qibla and Jilsa and so forth, which indicates the way in which that action is done. So Jilsa is the way that you sit. Qibla is the way that you face forward, and so forth. And Fitra is a particular way of creating. And we pointed out that the Fitra, that everything God creates has its own Fitra. He fatara kulla shay. He is the creator of all things. But let's not put that here. If you be so kind. Maybe I'll take it later. So God, all things He created in a particular way. And birds and fish and animals and ants and so forth, they all have their Fitra. Al-Fitra usually refers to the human Fitra. The al here indicates a particular Fitra, which we understand, and this is the human Fitra. And we pointed out that the Fitra, when it pertains to us, includes everything that is true to our nature. Everything. Even the way that we gesture, the way that we smile, the way that we learn and use language, the way we walk, the way we eat, and so forth. And then we looked at the verse in Surah Uloom, which is Surah number 30, verse 30. And this is the verse of Fitratullah, that God created all human beings with this Fitra. And we looked at that in detail, and we won't do that again tonight because it would be taking too much time. But the expression that is used here is Fitratullah, allati fatara an-nasa alayha. So this is the Fitra of God, or God's special Fitra, that according to which He created human beings. And we indicated that means that this Fitra, which is the human Fitra, is especially great, is especially good, is especially praiseworthy. And although cats also have a Fitra, we wouldn't call that Fitratullah. And just as other animals have a Fitra, we don't call that Fitratullah either. So this means that this is a very great Fitra. And it is in fact the greatest of them all. Of all the things that God created, the masterpiece is the human being, when the human being is at his or her best. And especially in the case of the prophets and the messengers and the great saintly people. And we also indicated that Fitratullahi indicates that human beings are perfectly created. And tonight we'll look in a few moments at the hadith about Abraham's nursery, the Hadanat Ibrahim, which is where all children go, the nursery of Abraham, which is where all children go who die before the age of maturity. But all of the children who are there are described as extremely beautiful, as the most beautiful of children. The children of Muslims, the children of even idolaters. And that beauty of the children indicates again the beauty of the fitrah, because they are manifestations of that fitrah, and they are embodiments of it. We went through a few hadith, and let's just review them quickly. We began with the hadith in which God says that He created all of His servants hunafa. Okay, so we talked about that hadith. God says in that, I created my servants as hanifs. And as you recall, the word hanif, which you're familiar with and you know well, the basic meaning of it is to incline towards the truth and to incline away from evil. So all human beings were created this way. The fasiq, on the other hand, is the person who inclines away from truth to falsehood and away from good to evil. The fasiq is the opposite of the hanif. But God didn't create anyone as a fasiq. God created everyone as a hanif. I created my servants as hanifs, inclining toward the truth, inclining away from falsehood. All of them, no exceptions. But then the satanic demons came to them and diverted them, فَاجْتَلَتْهُمْ, away from their religion, and they declared to be forbidden what I had made permissible for them. And they commanded them to commit shirk with me, to associate with me that which is not divine, of that for which no authority had been sent down. So this is a very important hadith, and a very explicit one in the fact that every human being, no matter where or when, they have this same fitrah. In another of the channels of this hadith, the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, shall I not speak to you about what God, glorified and majestic be He, has spoken to me about in the book, that God, glorified and majestic be He, created Adam and his children as Hanifs and Muslims. So again, it's the same thing, but this adds a certain explicitness that Adam and all of his children are created this way. There's another hadith that we didn't go into great detail about in the book. It's on page 308, and it's discussed from 308 to 339. And in this hadith, the Prophet says, by the one in whose hand is the soul of Muhammad, there is no human spirit, which is my translation for nesama. This hadith uses the word nesama. It's like soul, but there is no human spirit, but that it is born on the fitrah until its tongue expresses clearly about it what it chooses to believe. And we looked also at the famous hadith in Bukhari and Muslim and many other sources, which is one of the most frequently transmitted of all hadith and one of the most authentic of all hadith. And this is كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ, that every child born is born on the fitrah. And in these hadith, as in the verse in the Quran, we note the use of the harf, or the preposition ala, and as we indicated last time, just to repeat, that it means that they're completely on the fitrah. It's not like it's 50% or 30% in some and 100% in others. It means all of them have this fitrah, and it takes in the entirety of their being and their identity. And we have many other transmissions of that same hadith. Just to repeat a few of them, in Bukhari and Muslim, the transmission that they both agree on is, there is no child born, مَا مِن مَوْلُودٍ إِلَّا يُولَدُ. there is no child born, but that it is born on the fitrah. So maybe kullu mawlud, you might think that there could be exceptions to that, but this makes it very clear that no exception is intended. Muslim also has man yuladu ala hadhihi al-fitra. Whoever is born on this fitrah, this human fitrah. And Muslim also has every human being is given birth by his mother on the fitrah. Kullu insanin taliduhu ummuhu ala al-fitrah. Okay, so we went through those hadith, and then of course at the very end we came to the great hadith in Bukhari and in other sources about Hadanat Ibrahim. And in this, as you recall, this is about one of the night journeys of the Prophet, and we learn from this hadith, as Ibn Hajar says, that the Prophet had more than one, that he was shown many visions on that night, and one of them was that he saw this very tall and beautiful man in a garden that was a miraculous garden, and around him were the most abundant and beautiful children that he had ever seen. And he asked the angels, "What is this?" And they said, "Let's go on." But at the end of the journey, they come back to explain to him everything that he saw. So in one of the transmissions of Imam al-Bukhari, the Prophet says to the angels, I said to them, the angels, "Truly I have seen tonight something amazing. So what is it that I have seen?" And then when they come to the tall man, they say, "As for the tall man in the garden, it is Abraham, peace be upon him. And as for the children around him, they are every child born that died on the fitrah." Then some of the Muslims said, "Messenger of God, even the children of idolaters?" And the Messenger of God replied, "Even the children of idolaters." In Tabarani, he has the same transmission of the man with the white hair and the white beard, and he says that this is Abraham, the intimate friend of God, Khalilullah, and he says the children are wildan al-Muslimin wa kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra. So the children are the children of Muslims who die before maturity, and every child born that is born on the fitrah. And again, you note the importance of looking at the different transmissions, because the one before says every child that dies on the fitrah. And you might say, well, is there some way that a child might not die on the fitrah? We don't understand it that way, but this transmission makes it very clear that it's every child who's born on the fitrah, and they will then die on the fitrah also, if they should die, God forbid. So, as we said, these hadith are the most authentic information regarding the destiny of children in the hereafter who die early in this life. They constitute a nas, or nusus, that is authoritative texts that should remove all differences. And there are differences of opinion about this matter, but this is the strong position. As we saw, they will say this is the position of the muhaqqiqun, of those scholars, who get things right. And as we pointed out, these children are shown to be the most worthy of Abraham's company. And they are that way because they died on the fitrah. God says in the Quran, in Surah Ali Imran, verse 68, "Truly the people worthiest of Abraham are those who follow him and this prophet and those who believe. But these children also are worthy of Abraham." And that's because they die with that first covenant. Okay, so that is a short review of what we did yesterday. Inshallah, we will try to finish after an hour and a half today and have questions. And I'd like you tonight to write your questions. Most of you did last time, but it's actually easier for us if you write the questions. I think we can handle them better that way, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So what I'd like to talk about tonight is the Primordial Covenant. We saw in a number of these hadith and verses that we talked about, and especially this last one about the nursery of Abraham, peace be upon him, that they say that this is the Fitra, but this Fitra is also tantamount to the Primordial Covenant. Okay, so let's talk about that tonight, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And I'm so sorry that we don't have the books. Maybe you're not disappointed, but I am. And here we go to 147, 184. Okay, so there are a lot of hadith about the Primordial Covenant. And all of them can said to be commentaries on the verse that is in Surah Al-A'raf, which is Surah number 7, verse 172 to 173, where God says, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدُهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى شهدنا أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين أو تقولوا إنما أشرك آباؤنا من قبل وكنا ذرية من بعدهم أفتهلكنا بما فعل المبطلون. This is the verse of the Mithaq, of the Primordial Covenant. So let's look at that a little bit. All commentators agree that this verse is one of the proof texts on the Fitra. They disagree about whether the story has to be believed in literally or metaphorically. The vast majority of commentators take the story literally. Many Muslims had a hard time doing that, and one of the interesting things here is that our scholars who believed that it was literal allowed the others to take it metaphorically. And there's a number of reasons for that, but this is because of the fact that here we cannot insist on the literalness of it. We will see that the hadith about it speak of it in absolutely literal terms. And the standard position on a text like this is to read it literally unless there is some reason why that doesn't work. But again, this is part of the culture of understanding and of toleration that was typical of us. So we wouldn't say that, oh, you don't believe this is literal, then you're a kafir. Just like in the case of Isra and Mi'raj. We all believe in Isra and Mi'raj. But do you have to believe that it was physical, with the physical body? Most people do. Probably everybody here does. I do. But you're not required to do that. In other words, it is not a criterion of belief or disbelief. So this is interesting in this regard. So the translation of it that I have for you here is, and when thy Lord took from the children of Adam, from their loins, their progeny, and made them bear witness concerning themselves, am I not your Lord? They said, indeed, Bala, we bear witness. Then the verse goes on, lest you should say on the day, we have borne witness. They said, indeed, we have borne witness, lest you should say on the day of resurrection, truly of this we were heedless. Or lest you should say, it is only that our fathers ascribed partners unto God before us, and we were progeny after them. Will you destroy us for that which the falsifiers have done? So, this is a reference to what we call the great primordial day, the day of days. It is the foundation of God's purpose in creation. The primordial day is a day beyond all days reckoned in time. And this is the primordial covenant, the mithaq, or it's referred to also as the pact, the ahad. This verse is the cornerstone of Islamic sacred history, of our understanding of Islamic sacred history and anthropology. It establishes that the fundamental relationship between God and all human beings is premised upon the simple, unmediated recognition of God's lordship that took place in this event. At that moment in their pre-existence in the first world. How many worlds are there? How many are there? Right. Say it out loud. Say it out loud. No, just say 5. Yeah, 5. Yeah, so the first world is the existence that we had before this world. And that went on for eons. And that's where we got to know each other. Al-arwahu junudun mujannada, فما تعارف منها ائتلف وما تناكر منها اختلف. The spirits of human beings are marshaled in many ranks. Those who recognize themselves in this world, they come together in harmony. And those who don't recognize each other, they divide. They are at odds with each other. So that is alam al-arwah. That is the world in which we existed as arwah, as spirits. And it was for a long, long time. And in that world also we knew our Lord. In that world also we did tawaf around the throne of God. And then also we came to know each other. Even though there you didn't look like this. And you didn't look like you look right now. But when we're embodied in bodies here, we have this sense that I know you. I know who you are. You meet people, for example, that it's like, we met before, haven't we? No, this is the first time. But it's like, I've known you forever. Well, maybe you have. Okay? But so that's the first world. And also, that is part of our Fitra, because of the fact that complete immersion in the awareness of the divinity of God, that's stamped upon you absolutely, even to the extent that we can recognize each other here. So that's part of the Fitra also. We call that the first world. And actually that world ends with the Primordial Covenant, when Adam is embodied, because he was one of those spirits too, and he's given his body, and then all of his progeny are brought forth from him, and they're made to bear witness, am I not your Lord? Okay, that means that things are different now, because God is our God, He's our Ilah, but the Lord is the one who commands, and He prohibits, and He guides, and He gives guidance, and you have to obey Him. You can't disobey Him. So the second world begins with that. And that second world is where we are now, and this is the beginning of that, and the end of that primordial time. It's the great primordial day. Okay, and then you have this world, which is the second world. The third world is what? Barzakh. So it is the intermediate world, the world between this one and the resurrection. And that's also called the world of the grave, even though people don't necessarily end up in graves. Some die at sea, some may be burned in fires. There are many things that may happen, but they all go to the barzakh, and they live there as spirits until the resurrection. And with the resurrection, this world ends, and the barzakh ends, and then you have the fourth world. And then when that is over with the mawqif, the standing and the judgment, then you have the garden and the fire, and that is the fifth world. So there are five. Again, this is our view of sacred history as a totality. Okay? So, this Primordial Covenant, among the things that it shows us is that Tawheed, the knowledge of the oneness of God, is universal. It is stamped upon every single soul, whether they are atheists or agnostics or idolaters or whatever they may be. And in the context of the Quran, it comes to address the children of Israel. So it is said that these verses come in the context in that surah of addressing the children of Israel. They indicate that there was a covenant of Tawheed, and they also believe in Tawheed, that preceded them by eons, and that took in the entirety of the human race, not just Bani Israel, from the beginning to the end. Thus, the declaration of God's oneness was never something unique to the Jews, nor was it ever something unique to the children of Israel. And our sister, I think it was you, right, that asked the question about science? It was you. Okay, glad that you came back. I didn't answer your question very well. But maybe tonight we can come back to it. But our sister did ask, is there scientific proof for the Fitra? And in fact, when you know that that's true, then you can look for scientific proof. And there are a lot of other types of proofs as well. And one of them is the study of primitive religion. Primitive religion is the religion of people who don't belong to complex, socially and politically organized societies. They are tribes that are kinship groups and nothing more. So they don't have alliances, they don't have constitutions, they don't have different types of people, different people living together. Those were called primitive people. Today we don't like the word primitive because it's pejorative, isn't it? And so instead we can use words like micro-religions, little religions. And what do primitive people believe in? Well, there's a great study of primitive religion that was done in the 20th century. And it was done by a German anthropologist whose name is Wilhelm Schmidt. And it's called The Origin of the Idea of God. And he studied every primitive society that he could find in Asia, in Africa, in America, in the islands, in Australia, everywhere. And I'm glad to see you there. Welcome. I was looking for you over here, and I didn't see you. The question man, mashallah. But he saw that every primitive people believes in the one God. And they all have beautiful names for him. Names that indicate that he has no beginning, he has no end, that he's one. They're not animists. Animism comes later, it doesn't come in the beginning. So this is a revolutionary study. And he believed that this showed that there was ancient prophecy that embraced all people. Indeed, it is an indication of that. But it's also an indication that this is there in their souls. This is there in their fitras. So it's said that this is addressed to the Jews, that you're not the first people. You didn't invent this idea. This is something that all human beings have as a legacy. Others say that it is not addressed to the Jews, but to the idolatrous Arabs, since most of the surah is about them. Thus, the verses reject the contentions of the Arab idolaters after first addressing the Jews, and in this case, the verses remind the idolaters that the oneness of God is imprinted upon their fitras as they are on all people. Commentators sometimes compare this verse to the covenant that was offered to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains. Okay, and in these verses, the ones about the heavens and the earth and the mountains, created things are bestowed with faculties of intellect. God enables them to hear and to perceive and to speak and to choose and to respond to God. And it's interesting to note that this is no different than what will happen to us, because we are taken from the loins of Adam, and we are very tiny, and yet we're given the ability to understand and to perceive and to choose and to speak. So God in His power did this with these great things in creation. And these are the verses in Surah al-Ahzab, which is Surah number 33, verses 72 to 73, when God says, "Truly we offered the trust unto the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they refused to bear it, and were weary of it. Yet man bore it. Truly he has proven himself an ignorant wrongdoer, that God may punish the hypocritical men and the hypocritical women, the idolatrous men and the idolatrous women, and that God may relent unto the believing men and the believing women, and God is forgiving, merciful." Many, they will ask, what is this trust that is offered to the heavens and the earth and the mountains? And many say that it is the same trust that was offered to us. It is the trust of divine oneness, and to witness God's lordship, the same that was offered to humanity, as the verse indicates, before their coming to this world. The heavens and the earth and mountains were conscious of their weakness, despite their tremendous size and magnificent bearing, but human beings did otherwise. The earthly agreement, the primordial covenant between God and all human beings, was unmediated. It didn't have a medium. There's no go-between. It was direct. It was between you and God. No prophet was involved. No messenger was involved. And of course, it was universal. And it was universal in its immediateness. So every single human being, no matter who they were, they received this covenant directly from God. So it was contracted directly between God and each and every individual of all humanity from the first to the last. It may be regarded as the basis of all later and specific covenants, all of which were mediated by the prophets. The Quran mentions at least 18 times many various covenants and pacts between God and human beings. You have the first covenant, the one that we're talking about now. Then you have other types of covenants with Abraham, with Ishmael, with the prophets before that, all the prophets before they come into this world, with Abraham's progeny, with the children of Israel, the Christians, and the people of the book as a whole. So this is something really interesting to study. Many, many verses in the Quran that deal with this concept of covenant. Some say that the primordial covenant was taken immediately after God blew his spirit into Adam. And this is indicated in some of the hadith that we're going to look at tonight that deal with this covenant. Commentators often link the prophetic covenant with the pre-earthly covenant that we're talking about tonight. And the prophetic covenant is the one that God took between him and the prophets. So that comes second. First, and they were there in the first covenant. They take that. And then after that, they take a special covenant as prophets. That verse is in Surah Ali Imran. It is Surah number 3, verse number 81. And remember when God made the covenant of the prophets. He said to them, by that which I have given you of a book and wisdom, should a messenger then come to you, confirming what is with you, you shall surely believe in him, and you shall assist him. He said, do you agree and take on my burden on these conditions? They said, we agree. He said, bear witness, for I am with you among those who bear witness. Then you also have in al-Ahzab 33:7, and remember when we made with the prophets their covenant. So this is a second reference to it. And with thee, Muhammad, and with Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, the son of Mary. And we made with them a solemn covenant, that the truthful may be questioned concerning their truthfulness, and for the disbelievers he has prepared a painful punishment. God declares that most human beings will not fulfill this covenant. He says in Surah Al-A'raf, the heights, which is Surah number 7, verses 101 to 102, these are the towns whose stories we have recounted unto thee, Muhammad. Their messengers certainly brought them clear proofs, but they would not believe in what they had denied earlier. Thus does God set a seal upon the hearts of the disbelievers. And we did not find most of them faithful to their pact. So most of them are not faithful to their pact, and that pact is said to be the Primordial Covenant. Indeed, we found most of them to be deviant. So most people, this verse indicates, in failing to keep that pact, then they are also unfaithful to their natures. They fail to act upon the intrinsic knowledge and moral responsibility that God has instilled in them. This covenant is connected to the Fitra. That's something that everybody agrees to. It indicates that their innate recognition of God's oneness. It indicates their innate recognition of God's oneness, and that recognition constitutes the essence of what it means to be human. This primordial recognition of God's lordship created in us an innate disposition to recognize, to know, and to worship God in this world, and also to accept the prophets and messengers brought to us as reminders of what we already knew, and what we already knew instinctively but had largely forgotten. It makes those who reject the prophets and messengers willfully to be then disbelievers, people who cover over and bury away these truths. That's what kafara means, to cover over and to bury away. Even if most human beings do not remember the covenant, it left an indelible imprint upon our souls. It established moral responsibility for all human beings. When we reach the age of moral understanding and accountability, this innate knowledge is reawakened in the believers through their encounter with prophetic teaching, which serves as a reminder and a renewal of their initial covenant with God. Again, thus, as we saw in the Hadith of Abraham, children who die before the age of moral accountability die in felicity by virtue of this covenant. But it is of no benefit to anyone who rejects a later covenant in this world by denying the prophets and the messengers. The covenant is a proof that human beings all share an illustrious beginning. Their Lord manifested himself to them and spoke to them directly with his uncreated eternal speech. He imprinted it upon them, and with that he gave them a fitra of unlimited knowledge that includes and is based on the knowledge of God and his tawheed. Thus, of all things in our makeup, this covenant and this beginning constitute the most important of them all. It is the foundation of all matters of taklif, of moral accountability. As for our forgetting this all-important event, that too is said to be natural and necessary. That's also part of the fitrah. It is dictated by God's wisdom. This world is the place of taklif, of moral accountability, and of testing. If human beings did not forget their beginnings and this momentous event, then the purpose of all of this taklif and trial and examination would be overturned. Moreover, the proof of this happening is not to be found in what human tongues affirm or deny. People can say, well, I don't remember anything of this. This never happened. But it is to be found in what human hearts know to be true in their depths, especially in times of distress. At the same time, God makes this covenant a proof for us in the absence of prophetic guidance, and a proof against us when we reject prophetic guidance. So people who live isolated from prophetic guidance, they have still this covenant. And therefore, when they die as adults, they will be judged according to it, according to how faithful they were to it. Now what we'd like to do is to go on to look at a number of hadith that pertain to the covenant. And there are a lot of these. We'll look first of all on page 392 to 400. Okay, so So this is a hadith Qudsi about the covenant. And this one, which is in Bukhari and other sources, it's of all these hadith the most authentic. It's in Bukhari, Muslim, Imam Ahmad, and others. And it is أن الله يقول لأهون أهل النار عذابا لو أن لك ما في الأرض من شيء كنت تفتدي به قال نعم قال فقد سألتك ما هو أهون من هذا وأنت في صلب آدم أن لا تشرك بي فأبيت إلا الشرك. Right? So, Imam al-Bukhari transmits then that truly God will say to that person of the people of the fire whose punishment is the lightest, ahwan, if you had everything that is in the earth, would you pay it as a ransom to rid yourself of this punishment? The disbeliever will say, yes. Then God will say, but what I asked of you when you were in the loins of Adam was much lighter, much ahwan than this, namely, that you not associate anything with me. Yet you refuse to do anything but to associate others with me. In a similar transmission, Bukhari relates that the Prophet of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, used to say, the disbeliever will be brought forth on the day of resurrection, and it will be said to him, consider that you were to have the weight of the earth in gold. Would you pay it as a ransom to rid yourself of this punishment? The disbeliever will say, yes. And God shall say to him, but you were asked what was much easier. Here it's aysar than this. You were asked something much easier than this. You were asked to do something natural that was right there in your soul. These are very, very important hadith. And again, these are the most authentic of all these hadith. Imam Muslim has 4 transmissions, just like Imam Bukhari. In his first transmission that we have in this book, and the first that comes in his own compilation, it says, God, blessed and exalted be He, will say to the person with the lightest punishment of the people of the fire, if you had the world and everything in it, would you give it as a ransom to escape this punishment? And he shall say, yes. Then God will say, I surely willed, aradtu, or wanted from you something lighter than this while you were in the loins of Adam, namely that you do not do shirk. Then the transmitter says, I believe the Prophet said, and I would not put you into the fire, but you refuse to do anything but commit shirk. So again, we give you these other transmissions because they add something. So here, the thing which is added, there's a little bit difference in the wording, but the thing which is added is that if you do this, I will not put you in the fire. And yet you refuse to do that. Okay, so let's talk about the hadith. There are other transmissions of it. These hadith indicate that the Primordial Covenant was literally true. And of course they're authentic hadith, but they have to be not just authentic hadith, but they have to be mutawatir, they have to be transmitted in a particular way before they become qat'i. Qat'i in the sense that you have to say, no, you have to follow this. Imam Ahmad has a transmission that uses the word dhahr, the back of Adam, instead of sulb, which is the singular of the form dhuhur, which occurs in the Quran. These transmissions confirm explicitly that the covenant included the prohibition of committing shirk. So that's something that's not explicit in the Quran. Consequently, this is part of the Fitra also, that is ingrained in us. The Hadith establishes the Hanifiyya of the Fitra, which is of course the rejection of shirk and the declaration of the oneness of God. So this Hadith then complements the Hadith we had before. Truly I created all of my servants Hanifs. The Hadith also indicates clearly that it is easily in the capacity of each and every human being to fulfill the dictates of the covenant. That's, I think, one of the most important things about it. That it's very easy for us to believe, it's very easy for us to obey. This is our nature. It also affirms the reality of human choice in this matter, and the fact that their fitras help them in this regard and push them to do it. So you have a choice and you make that choice. Ironically, most people will make a choice which is against their own fitrah, but their fitrah pushes them to make the right choice. All of these are proofs against the human being who disbelieves on the Day of Judgment. Everything was there to show you what the truth is and the right way to go. These hadith also indicate clearly that the person who fulfills this first primordial covenant by taking the second one in this world, if it comes to them at the hands of the prophets or at the hands of the followers of the prophets, then they will have great felicity in the next world. And again, that the disbeliever is the one who willfully refuses to do that. By refusing the second covenant, and in doing that, then he annuls both. So this is why when people believe, then we say that they fulfill two covenants. And it may be more. So the Jew or the Christian who believes, they have the first covenant, which is universal, and then they have their covenant with their dispensation as Jews or Christians, and then they have the covenant that comes to them through the prophet. And of course they're given twice the rewards. They're given additional rewards. If you don't believe in the second covenant, if it's brought to you, and it has to be brought to you clearly, so that you know that it's the truth, then that annuls both of them. Okay, so let's look at another hadith, and this in the book is on page 401. Okay, and this one, it says, أخذ الله الميثاق من ظهر آدم بنعمان يعني عرفة فأخرج من صلبه كل ذرية ذرأها فنشرهم بين يديه كالذر ثم كلمهم قبلا قال ألست بربكم قالوا بلى شهدنا أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين أو تقولوا إنما أشرك آباؤنا من قبل وكنا ذرية من بعدهم أفتهلكنا بما فعل المبطلون. Okay, so we'll look at that. So this is a Sahih transmission, and the main source for it is Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal in his Musnad. And he says, God took the covenant, the mithaq, from the back of Adam in Na'man, which means Arafah. Thus he brought forth from the loins, and here we have Salb of Adam, all the progeny that God created until the day of resurrection. Then he spread them out before him like dhar, which means like tiny ants, or like tiny seeds. Okay, so that means we were very small, although we didn't look like ants. We actually looked like we look now. But we were very, very small. It's all human beings who will ever be created from the beginning to the end. And he spoke to them directly and said, "Am I not your Lord?" They said, "Indeed, we bear witness, lest you should say on the day of resurrection, truly of this we were heedless. Or lest you should say, it is only that our fathers ascribed partners unto God beforehand, and we were their progeny after them. Will you destroy us for that which the falsifiers have done?" Okay, so the Arabs knew of two Na'mans. One is Na'man al-Arak, which is outside of Mecca, and they call this Na'man al-Akbar, the bigger Na'man. And this is Wadi Arafah. The other one is Na'man al-Gharqad, which is in Medina, and they call that Na'man al-Asghar, the lesser Na'man. The hadith indicates that this is Na'man al-Arak. In other words, this is the Wadi Arafah. So this is very interesting, isn't it? What is Wadi Arafah? How many of you have made pilgrimage? I should probably say how many have not. So when you go to Arafat, you have to leave the hal. You have to leave the haram. The haram is huge, it's many, many square miles. And you do that when you come to Wadi Arafah. Wadi Arafah is that big wadi, the dry riverbed that you cross with a bridge when you go to Arafat. Okay, it's quite big. You're not in Arafat until you've crossed that. Once you cross that, then you're in Arafat. So according to Ibn Abbas's transmission, this is where the covenant took place. That in Wadi Arafah, there in that place where you go for pilgrimage, to affirm the covenant and to restore the covenant, that's actually where it was taken. So again, this hadith, which is an authentic hadith, it indicates that the covenant happened as a literal truth. It had a place, not just a time, and a specific place that we know really well, and a place that's connected to the pilgrimage rites. That's incredible. And then he spoke to them directly, qibalan, which means iyanan, that is, they could see him. And this is very important because it means that God did not speak to us min wara'i hijab. He didn't speak to us from behind a veil, but that we actually saw God in a manner which no doubt is like the way that the believer will see God in the garden. And all of us, we believe in that although God is not limited in time and space and he doesn't have a body, that he manifests himself to the believers in the garden and they will see him. How do they see him? They say they see him with the totality of their being. If you were to ask them their name, they wouldn't even know what it is. It's like a type of fana, but it is the most beautiful of all the experiences of the garden, and it happens repeatedly. So this is also very important because it means that not only did you hear the words of God, and the word of God is uncreated, and the uncreated word of God, which is represented in the created word of God, in the Quran, or in the Torah, or in other revelations, that uncreated word of God is connected to God's infinite knowledge. That means that when you hear that uncreated speech, you receive access to infinite knowledge. That's stamped upon your soul. And the sound of that is so beautiful that it's beyond words. Some of our great masters say that when you hear something beautiful, or you see something beautiful, like maybe the sound of a flute or whatever it might be, that you feel the ecstasy of that beauty because it reminds you in a way that you're not aware of your hearing the speech of God on the day of Arafat. All the beauty that we know, it goes back to that. But from this hadith you also see that there was another aspect of that beauty, and that is that you actually saw God. And there's nothing more beautiful than that. So you saw him and he spoke to you. Just as in the garden you will see him. وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَى رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. Faces on that day will be radiant with light, looking upon their Lord. So this happened before. And then of course in the garden he says, Salam, قَوْلًا مِّن رَبٍّ رَحِيمٍ. He says, perfect peace, a word spoken by a merciful Lord. So this is a tajalli of God. This is a manifestation of God. When he manifests himself to us, this leads to us to give, this gives us also ma'rifah, doesn't it? So our knowledge of God is not just a theoretical or a theological or a philosophical knowledge, but it is a knowledge based on ma'rifah. It is based on the direct knowledge of him. And this tajalli took place there in Arafat. And of course the day of Arafat and pilgrimage is the day of tajalliyat, isn't it? The whole day God is manifesting himself to you in forgiveness. So thus this vision and hearing are among the most important vehicles for stamping Iman and Ma'rifah and the love of God on the Fitrah. It also explains why the Fitrah includes, as we will see, our inclination to worship God and to serve God and to love him. For there is nothing more beautiful than he. How are we doing for time? Assalamu alaikum, how are you? How are you? 8:35. And that means that time is, well, we've still got some time, right? Okay. So here's another hadith that I'd like to give to you, and this is on page 407 to 417. And this is Sahih. It's transmitted primarily by Imam at-Tirmidhi. And it says, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لما خلق الله آدم مسح ظهره فسقط من ظهره كل نسمة هو خالقها من ذريته إلى يوم القيامة وجعل بين عيني كل إنسان منهم وبيصا من نور ثم عرضهم على آدم فقال أي رب من هؤلاء؟ قال هؤلاء ذريتك فرأى رجلا منهم فأعجبه وبيص ما بين عينيه فقال أي رب من هذا؟ قال رجل من آخر الأمم من ذريتك يقال له داود قال ربي وكم جعلت عمره؟ قال 60 سنة قال أي ربي زده من عمري 40 سنة فلما انقضى عمر آدم جاءه ملك الموت فقال أولم يبقى من عمري 40 سنة قال أولم تعطها لابنك داود قال فجحد آدم فجحدت ذريته ونسي آدم فنسيت ذريته وخطئ آدم فخطئت ذريته. Is that problematic? Probably get some questions about that. So Imam at-Tirmidhi transmits authentically from God's messenger. When God created Adam, he wiped over his back, ظهره, and so there fell from his back every human spirit, every nesama God would create from his progeny until the day of resurrection. God put between the eyes of each human insan, among them, a radiance of light. That's wabis. Wabis is a radiance of light. And he presented them to Adam. Adam said, "O Lord, who are these?" God said, "These are your progeny." Adam saw from them, or from among them, a man, the radiance, Adam saw a man from them who the radiance between his eyes amazed him. So he said, "O Lord, who is this?" God said, "He is a man from among the last of the communities." Well, that's very nice. It means that the children of Israel come at the very end. From your progeny, and then the Christians and the Muslims, of course, who will be called David. Adam said, "Lord, how long have you made his life?" He said, 60 years. Adam said, "Lord, add 40 years from my life." This is the problematic part. I don't know if I can answer your questions. But when the life of Adam came to an end, the angel of death came to him, and Adam said, "Are there not 40 years of my life remaining?" He said, "But did you not give them to your son David?" And he said, but Adam denied, jahada. So his progeny denied. Adam forgot, so his progeny forgot. Adam sinned, so his children sinned. Is that difficult? Is that difficult? I better get a question about that. You don't have to ask it, but if it comes this way, I'll have to try to answer it. So these transmissions establish again that the covenant is not metaphorical, that it was literally true. Each human being is referred to here as insan. And each of them had a wabis, a radiance of light between their eyes. So this indicates, first of all, that they were literally brought forth from Adam's loins, and that each of them had this wabis, which in Arabic would be the same as saying bariq, bariq. So it's like a radiance, some radiant shining light. And what does that mean? Again, it means that's their fitrah. So the fitrah of every one of these human beings, you, every one of them, was radiant, meaning that it was filled with light and knowledge. And again, what's important here is that even before God speaks to them, they have this wabis. Now that's not necessarily clear in the hadith, but again, as we say, they come into the loins of Adam already illuminated. They've been in that first world. They know God. They've been doing tawaf around his throne. And that will only be multiplied. So again, the treasure of the knowledge, the beautiful, radiant knowledge of God, this is in every human being to a degree that is absolutely unimaginable. And you may find it difficult for you to be that kind of a believer that you want to be, but it's all there in your nature if you can only tap into it. The fact that the progeny are referred to as human beings, insan, and then also that he sees a rajul among them, This indicates that the progeny had human form. So although they're small like ants, don't think that they're little ants. They're like just tiny human beings. Not microscopic, but very small human beings. And of course, so that they can all be gathered together. All right, so then we want to take one more hadith. This is probably the most frequently narrated of all the hadiths, and we'll look at it. It has some transmissions that are, to me, very, very amazing. So these are many hadith. No doubt you've heard these. Again, maybe the wording for some of them will be problematic. All of these hadith pertain to qadr. So all of them pertain to the predestination of human beings. That's in every single one of them. It's expressed in different ways. But this is what they have in common. Many of them are authentic, some of them are a little bit weaker. In fact, they don't tell us much about Fitra. Really what they assert is that the issue of qadr, that God knew the destiny of all of these people, whether they would go to the garden or to the fire. That's the main thing that is here, whether they belong to the right hand or the left hand. But we believe in that. That's a fundamental belief. And we also believe that the affirmation of qadr, or of predestiny, does not negate free will. This is fundamental Islamic belief. And it's one of the most important things in our theology. And we have different theological formulas for it. Kasb, acquisition, being one of the most well-known in the Ash'ari school and the Maturidi school. So that's a very prominent part of these hadith. I hope you don't find that disturbing. They also indicate that God took the covenant right after the creation of Adam. They also indicate, like all the others, that the covenant was literal truth, which is what most Muslims believe. But you don't have to believe it if it's too difficult for you. When God says that some of them are created for the garden, he means that some of them will keep the covenant. And when he says some of them are predestined for the fire, it means some of them will break the covenant. And his knowing their destinies, of course, indicates his knowledge, his infinite knowledge. God knows all things that will be. He even knows how many breaths, infinite breaths, you'll take in the garden, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And all of this is an indication that there is no jabr and there is no ikrah. There is no forcing of this. We're not forced to do what we don't choose to do on our own. So we'll begin here with the hadith of Ube ibn Ka'b, radiallahu anhu. It's very, very interesting. This would be on page 418 in the book. 418 to 428. I don't think I'll read it in the book. We have time, but maybe we don't have time to get through these hadith. So, first of all, this hadith speaks clearly of the two covenants. That there is the covenant of all humanity, and then there is the covenant of the prophets. It also indicates that the covenant that is given to all the children of Adam has three really important elements. One of them is the affirmation of Tawheed and the repudiation of Shirk. Know that there is no God other than I, so do not associate anything with me. At-Tabari adds, so they concurred with God on that day to obey him. So it adds that. They agreed to obey. And number two, that God promises in this covenant to send messengers. Because he says, truly I will send my messengers unto you. They will remind you, يُذَكِّرُونَكُمْ, of my pact and my covenant. And number 3, that God promises to send down books, and I will send down my books upon you. Tabari's narration and another one, they also add regarding destiny, al-qadr, كان في علمه بما أقر به من يكذب به ومن يصدق به. So this is a nice addition, that it was part of God's knowledge regarding the affirmation they made, which of them would deny it in this world and which of them would keep it truthfully. It's expressed in a different way. So it's a long hadith, and let me read to you this. This is from Ubay ibn Ka'b, as we said, and this is from Zawaid al-Imam Ahmad, transmitted by his son Abd-Allah. So he said, the narrator said, the Prophet said, peace be upon him, God gathered them together and he made them spirits. He made them arwahan, so that's new. Then he gave them form, فَصَوَّرَهُمْ. So first they were spirits, then he gave them form. Then he gave them the power of speech, فَأَنْطَقَهُمْ. So they spoke, فَتَكَلَّمُوا. Then he took from them the pact, al-ahad, and the covenant, al-mithaq, and he made them bear witness against themselves, am I not your Lord? Then God said, truly I will make the 7 heavens and the 7 earths bear witness against you. And I will make your father Adam, peace be upon him, bear witness against you, lest you should say on the day of resurrection, we knew nothing about this. And then he says, know, God is saying this to us, know that there is no God other than I. So do not associate anything with me. Truly I will send my messengers unto you. They will remind you of my pact and my covenant, and I will send down my books upon you. So they acknowledged that, and God lifted up Adam over them so that he could look at them. And that's just like the hadith we had before, isn't it? Where he looks at all of them and he sees that he sees David. So here again you see that he lifted up Adam so he could see all of them. And he saw the rich and the poor, and people of beautiful form and less than beautiful form. So that means also that we look there like we look here. Some people, and also that for some reason he knew which of us would be poor and which would be rich. So Adam said, Lord, why did you not make all of your servants the same? Why didn't you make them all equal? God said, I loved that I be shown gratitude. Ahbabtu an ushkar. I loved that I be shown gratitude. Who are the most grateful of all people? The rich or the poor? That's really what it means. Who were the first people to enter the garden? The poor, right? They entered the garden a long time before the rich. I wanted to be shown gratitude. And Adam saw the prophets among them like shining lamps, suruj, with light upon them. They were given another special covenant, which the Quran tells us, which he calls mithaq, regarding messengerhood and prophecy. And this is the meaning of God's statement, and remember when we took from the prophets their covenant, until his statement, and Jesus the son of Mary. Now this is something that's really interesting, although this is called a nukara. In hadith, a nukara is something in the hadith which is strange and unique. And in fact, this nukara hurts the authenticity of this transmission. And he, Jesus, was among those spirits. That's beautiful. Now that's not a nukara. Then later he sent him unto Mary, and the transmitter related from Ubay ibn Ka'b that Jesus entered her from her mouth. So that's the nukara. Don't have to talk about that. And it could be a mistake or whatever, but it's that statement that weakens the hadith, even though it's well transmitted. But even though that is not what the Quran says, nevertheless, the fact that Jesus was there, that's a really amazing addition. You have this hadith also in al-Hakim, in al-Mustadrak, and he adds, so they concurred with God on that day to obey him. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. That's in al-Hakim. They concurred with God on that day to obey him. فَأَقَرُّوا لَهُ يَوْمَئِذٍ بِالطَّاعَةِ. At-Tabari has a similar transmission, which we talked about before. It was part of the knowledge of God regarding the affirmation they made, which of them would deny it and which of them would keep it truthfully. Okay? Okay, now we come to a whole bunch of other ones, and we may not be able to get through all of them, but these are all very similar and they're from many transmitters. We'll start with the transmissions of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. Of all of these, this is the most renowned and the most authentic of these transmissions, and this is in Imam Malik, in the Muwatta. So Umar ibn al-Khattab was asked about the verse, and when thy Lord took from the children of Adam from their loins their progeny, and made them bear witness concerning themselves, am I not your Lord? They said, indeed we bear witness. Lest you should say on the day of resurrection, truly of this we were heedless. So Umar was asked about that verse. And he said, I heard the Messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, be asked about this verse. And the Messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, truly God, blessed and exalted be He, created Adam. Then He wiped over his back with His right hand, and brought forth from him a certain progeny. And He said, I created these for the garden, and they will do the deeds of the people of the garden. Then He wiped over Adam's back, here there's no specification of the hand, and brought forth a certain progeny, and said, I created these for the fire, and they will do the deeds of the people of the fire. That's probably hard to swallow for some of us. Then a man said, Messenger of God, then what is the point of action? فَفِيمَ الْعَمَلُ. Then what is the point of action? Then God's messenger said, truly God, when He creates a servant for the garden, He puts him to work, إِسْتَعْمَلَهُ, with the deeds of the people of the garden, until he dies doing a deed of the people of the garden. So He makes them enter the garden. And if God creates a servant for the fire, He puts him to work with the deeds of the people of the fire, until he dies doing the deed of the people of the fire, so He makes him enter the fire. It's interesting that Ali al-Qari, who's one of our great commentators on hadith, one of the great scholars, he says regarding the hadith, Kilta yaday al-Rahman, Kilta yaday al-Rahmani yamin, both of God's hands are right hands. He says this indicates that pure evil, ash-sharr al-mahd, has no existence in this creation. Okay? That there is no evil that is pure evil, or nothing but evil. So I created these for the garden and these for the fire. That's hard for a lot of people. I hope it's not hard for you. By this we know, the commentators say, that God's knowledge, exalted be He, regarding the children of Adam, preceded them about everything concerning them, who would be felicitous and who would be infelicitous, which of them would, what each of them would do and what they would deserve. Qadr, destiny, is God's sir, it's His secret. It cannot be understood through disputation, nor can extensive discussion of it be sufficient. Disputation about it opens nothing without breaking something or closing something else. These are the words of our scholars. And thy Lord does no oppression to His servants. So that's also a verse that reigns over all of these and dictates their meaning. I created those for the garden and those for the fire indicates God's knowledge of how they will live and how they will end their lives. It does not indicate that that fitra is of sa'ada or shaqawa. Their fitra is still good. Or that these people in their childhood already deserve the garden or the fire. Or that they even understood the meaning of kufr or of iman. There's a whole bunch of, there's 4 other main transmissions of the hadith from 4 other different transmitters. I think though that I'll stop with that because they're all sort of similar. And inshallah we will begin the questions. God bless you and protect you and give you good and give us understanding. Ameen, ameen, ameen. So, make sure to give to Sidi Hisham. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think one of the points that I'd like to make to begin with, we pointed out last time that the fitrah includes everything about us. The way you walk, the way you eat, and in the context of that we talked about the bodily fitrahs, like cutting the fingernails, trimming the mustache, and so forth. And we also mentioned circumcision. And that sent off an alarm, which I didn't hear, but the notes told us that. So this is male circumcision, and it's certainly not FGM. It's not female genital mutilation. That is ugly. That is abusive to the nth degree. So some of you, that naturally came to your minds, and I wanted to dispel that. It is usually easier to identify who we are in love with rather than who we are not in love with, or the lack of depth in our love. Can you talk to us a bit about being in love with Allah, so that we do not have to know about it by virtue of being lacking in our love? It's a little bit difficult to understand. Again, as we said, and we're going to go through this in the next 2 days, the love of Allah is absolutely ingrained in the fitrah. And it is a love of God that has no limits whatsoever. And, we say that your path to God begins, of course, by purifying yourself. But that's also in the process of coming to know yourself. That he who knows himself knows his Lord. And part of that self-knowledge is learning about your heart and learning how to access your fitrah so that it pours forth in you. So that is a love that once you tap into it, it doesn't have to be defined, it doesn't have to be explained. It completely takes you over. And the kind of love that we have for human beings, our mothers, our fathers, the women that we love and marry, the men that the women love and marry, and stuff like that, that is nothing compared to that love. Although, for many human beings, if they've never been loved, then it may be difficult for them to access that love of God which is in their hearts. And this is one of the reasons why, among the many mercies and wonders about raising children in this world, and the love that they get from their mothers, and that they have for their mothers, and for the women and the men around them, that when this is there, this makes it very easy for them to move from that love, from those people, to the love of God. And the contrary is unfortunately true, that when people have been starved for love and denied love, then it may be very difficult for them to find that love in themselves. It can be done. And this is one of the reasons also why in our community, the community that we have between ourselves, these bonds of brotherhood and of sisterhood are so important. And, they need to have adab, and they need to have mercy in them, because this also repairs us. We take from each other. A person who may have been deprived of love, who comes into the company of a group of people who have not been deprived of it, and who have it, from their families, and then also the love of God, they can give that to them. So love can set that right. And we have a lot of problems with marriage in this age. It's one of the signs of the end of times. And we have to work on that really hard. But we've got to restore to the fullest extent that we can, the sunnah of beautiful prophetic marriage. This is so good for us, and it's good for our children, and this helps us to tap into easily that love that is there in the fitrah. What is a good measure or standard to differentiate fitrah from falsehood in day-to-day matters? Well, we don't distinguish fitrah from falsehood. We distinguish fitrah from what is not fitrah. In other words, we distinguish what is fitrah from what is not natural. And you could say that what is not natural is not true. That's true. But, of course, the opposite of falsehood is truth. And one of the important things about fitrah is that the fitrah has in it the knowledge of truth and falsehood. It has in it the knowledge of good and evil. You'll see that as we go through it more and more. So it has in it this incredible treasury. And it's said that everything that we come to know in this world, even things like mathematics and geometry and botany and biology or history, it's always tapping into a knowledge which is there in your fitrah. So it's not just the knowledge of God. It's not just the prohibition of idolatry. It's many, many other things as well. What is the original sin that St. Augustine mentions? So we talked about that a little bit yesterday. And original here means first. And this is the sin of Adam that led to the fall. And Jews, Christians, Muslims, we all believe in this. We all have very similar beliefs about that. We believe, of course, that God forgave Adam. That's really, really important. That stops the doctrine of original sin in its heels, or right there in place. But St. Augustine, who's a very important formulator of Christianity, who lived in the 5th century, the 400s, and he lived in Tunisia. He is the father of Western civilization in many ways. He's very important in Western Christianity, and therefore he's also very important in European civilization, even though he's an African. He's a North African. But St. Augustine, he formulates the doctrine of original sin. That when Adam fell, all of his children, including the prophets and the messengers, were affected by that sin and guilty of that sin, even though they didn't do it. And that they cannot remove it from themselves on their own. So therefore, this is a belief that human nature is perverted, that human nature is not good. And then if you believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior, according to Augustine, then that can rectify your nature. And it removes the original sin. And it gives you a good nature, but it's not your nature. It's a Christ-like nature. So this is a really big part of Western Christianity. Some of the critics of Western Christianity, like Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher, felt that the doctrine of original sin was an extremely harmful doctrine. Because first of all, it's irrational. How can all these billions of people be guilty for the sin of eating the forbidden fruit? It's like this is out of proportion. And they didn't do it. But this is St. Augustine. And in a way, it's a theological maneuver, to affirm the doctrine of crucifixion and salvation through crucifixion. That's what you've got no way out of this, you see. One-way Jesus. And here, it's like, these are things that are important for us to study. You really need to know, if you don't know already, that the first major issue that Christians disagreed about after the ascension of Jesus Christ was the crucifixion. And St. Jerome, who is one of the church fathers, and who believes in crucifixion, he says, the blood of Christ had not dried in the earth of Judea, which is Jerusalem, but that people said, it's not him. It is one who looks like him. Exactly like the Quran. بَلْ شُبِّهَ لَهُ. Okay, so that's what Christians said from the very beginning. And of course, when the crucifixion took place, none of the disciples of Jesus Christ were there. None of them witnessed it. Okay, and many Christians believed that someone else was crucified in his place, which is our belief also. We have a number of accounts, two primary accounts about that differ a little bit. Now, that's extremely important. And those Christians are very strong in the earliest Christian church, in the 1st century and the 2nd century. Okay, and the crucifixion is a big problem because of the fact that we Christians and Muslims all believe that Jesus, the son of Mary, was the Christ, the Messiah. Now, in the people of the book, the Messiah is a figure more powerful than the Mahdi in Islam. What if you were to say, well, the Mahdi appeared, but he was shot and killed? That means there's no Mahdi, right? It means he's not the Mahdi. The Mahdi will not be shot and he will not be killed. He is a victor. He is a conqueror. He doesn't want to rule, but he's made to rule. The Messiah is stronger than that in the tradition of the Jews and the Christians. And in ours too, because when the Mahdi comes, which is the end of that middle period before the last signs, the Mahdi comes at the very end. He is the first major sign of the Day of Judgment. After him comes the Dajjal. The Dajjal appears, that's a major sign. After that comes what? The descent of Jesus Christ, what Christians call the second coming. And he, in a way, saves the Mahdi and his army, because it's difficult to face the Dajjal. He's a sorcerer. He's the master of sorcery, and the natural order is being inverted, and Jesus Christ takes care of it, and he's the one who will kill the Dajjal. That's what we believe. And Christians and Jews also had in their past, and Jews still do, the belief that the Messiah is invincible. And that's why to say that they say we crucified the Messiah, the son of Mary, that means we crucified the false Messiah, the son of Mary. And they said things about her too, because the Messiah cannot be crucified. And that's your belief. And that is a belief that is theologically correct. And it is a belief that affirms that the son of the Virgin Mary was indeed the Messiah. Okay, so the whole issue of crucifixion is something that Islam shows never happened in the first place. And the Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered after World War II and are the biggest archaeological find of the modern age, you know, they show that there were Jews who were awaiting the Messiah before the destruction of the temple and before the coming of Jesus Christ, maybe 70 years or so before, who believed that he was coming. Did they believe he would be crucified? Never. They were making weapons to fight with him on his side. Did they believe that he would come to forgive people's sins? No. He was coming as a conqueror. That's what the Romans believed too. That's why they were so concerned about him. And then these people of the Dead Sea, they believed that they had to keep their teaching secret, because if the Jews knew they had it, they would kill them. They also say the Jews interpolate their books and they change them. But they believed that after the Messiah would come, there would come the great prophet of the end of days, who is a super prophet. And they had to believe in him too. And they had descriptions of him. So the issue of original sin is a very strange issue, in my opinion. And Christians of the East, Orthodox Christians, Greek Orthodox Christians, Russian Orthodox Christians, Jacobite Christians like the Copts of Egypt and the Christians of Ethiopia, they don't believe in this. The Jews don't believe in it either. Okay? So we talked about the 5 lives, and here Imam Abd-Allah al-Haddad, God be pleased with him, has a book called The Lives of Man. And this explains these 5 lives in a very brief and a very clear way. A lot of you know that book. If you don't, then you can get it. It was translated into English by Mustafa al-Badawi, who is an Egyptian, who was very, very close to Habib Ahmed Mashhoor al-Haddad. I know both of them. I knew Habib Ahmed and I know Sidi Mustafa. And it also has a contemporary Arabic edition with a foreword by al-Makhlouf, the famous Mufti of Egypt, who's also the ancestor of our sister Iman and our brother Ismail. ما هو عالم الذر? Are there any specific information embedded in our fitrah? Again, عالم الذر, we use that to refer to that life before. And that's because the dhar who are taken out of the loins of Adam, they're coming fresh out of that world. But in that world you were a spirit. And how big you were, I don't know. But you were a spirit and you also had a form. And that form was a form such that when we meet you here, we say, I recognize you, I know you. So it has a big effect on the fitrah. We actually emphasize that. Why are some people inclined to do bad and others to do good if everyone's fitrah is the same? First of all, no one begins inclined to do evil. No one begins inclined to do bad. People do that for other reasons. This is something that comes later. But in the beginning, this is not their natural inclination. It is true that we have different personalities, and some of us have anger, and some of us have mercy and forgiveness. You see in your own children, that they can be very different among themselves, but everyone begins with a good beginning. What is the implication of understanding fitrah as the primordial innate disposition and the development of humanities and social sciences within an Islamic cognitive framework? That's a good question. I think this would be a good thing for us to talk about. What are those implications, especially the person who wrote this very intelligent question? But, of course, one of those implications is that human beings are all brothers and sisters. And that whether we are black or white, rich or poor, we all have the same nature. So in our humanities, if you want to use that word, just as in our religion, we are people who believe in the unity of human beings. We're certainly not the only ones who believe that. Other people have believed that in the past as well. And it is an ancient prophetic teaching. It has those implications. Whatever you know that pertains to the humanities or to social sciences, again, is going to come out of your fitrah. It's put in there. We would tap into it, by studying the law, learning our religion, learning our traditions, and so forth. Would anybody like to add something here? Especially the person guilty of writing the question. Yes, no Shad? Would you write the question?
Unfortunately, yes.
You did. It's a good question.
I guess in terms of the development of the humanities and social sciences within the array of Western discourses, we see Freudian and Marxian.
It's not working?
Within Freudian, Marxian and other paradigms, even liberal, where human beings are reduced to rational maximizers of self-interest. And so
Okay, so I thought you were talking about our doing our own thing, our own humanities, our own social sciences.
And so for us, within the Islamic cognitive framework, how do we develop something that is both creative and can engage with the metaphysical reality?
So our brother's saying, how do we engage with the humanities that are there, the social sciences that are there, and then how do we develop something of our own? You know, we have an extremely rich tradition, and many of you know that, many of you study that, and humanism, which is the central idea of the humanities, is one of our legacies. And the humanism that the West prides itself in so much, it's part of the gift that we gave to them. And the excellent book on that you can read is what? I wish you all knew that book. I know I've mentioned it before. What is it? Thank you, my dear sister. The Rise of Humanism. This is a book that I wish all of you had in your libraries, even though it is a highly academic work written by George Maqdisi, who was a great scholar. And he was a Christian Arab, but he did a lot of good, and he did many things for us that we couldn't and didn't do for ourselves. But George Maqdisi shows that the humanism that the Renaissance prided itself in so much has direct links to the Islamic world. Okay, and especially to people like Abdullah ibn Qutayba and others, and the chanceries, the udaba, the men of letters like Jahith and others. Okay, so we have a role in that, even the Western humanism. And he gives us a quotation way back in the back of the book from Pico de la Mirandola. Pico is called the ideologue of the Renaissance. He wrote the manifesto of the Renaissance, like Marx wrote the manifesto of communism. And Pico, in his manifesto, he says something. I can't quote to you exactly what he says. I don't remember right at the moment. But he says that there is nothing, so to speak, on the stage of the world greater than man. That man is the measure of all things. The Renaissance would repeat this over and over again, meaning human being, by the way, young lady. So don't be upset. Okay? As I learned from Abd-Allah the Saracen, as I learned from Abdullah the Arab, which is probably meaning Abdullah ibn Qutayba, who was many hundreds of years before him. So this is something for humanities. And where did the West get the PhD degree? Where did they get the dissertation? Where did they get what they call academic freedom? Where did they get the university chair, like you have at Azhar and other places? Where did they get the university quad? They got that from the schools of higher fiqh and jurisprudence that produced the mujtahids and the muftis and the fuqaha. And these madaris, I don't like to use the word madaris because you're going to think of a children's madrasa beating little boys with sticks and making them memorize the Quran. These madaris were colleges. They had libraries. And you had to produce, to be a mufti or a mujtahid or a faqih, you had to produce an independent work in fiqh. taking a position that was not well known or not known at all, or that's different from the other positions, and you had to defend it, and you had to learn how to debate. If you studied Hadith, you didn't have to learn how to debate, but if you studied fiqh, you did. You had to know how to make an argument. So that will go into the West and lead to the creation of the colleges and the universities and the PhD degree. That's something. That's humanities, isn't it? And we have that humanism, and then we have the core humanism of Islam, which is a transcendent humanism. Transcendent humanism. Al-Insan al-Kamil. That is big time humanism. And that is that I, by disciplining my insan al-Hayawan, can become al-Insan al-Kamil. Okay, and we get that from following the prophets and disciplining ourselves. And that's much higher than European humanism, especially as it will develop very materialistically. So these are some routes that we can go, to engage Western thought really intelligently and to show where it is right and where it's not is really essential. And some people say, and I believe it's true, that for Islam to do today what it's got to do, we've got to do that. We have to engage Western thought. And that means to engage the thought of Freud and Jung and Bergson and others. And to know what do they contribute to us that's of benefit and what is mistaken. This is really, really important. We won't go into more detail on that right now, but this is very, very important for us to do. And you have a rich tradition. You have to tap into it. Could you please elaborate? Let me just say one other thing here. One of our brothers, I shouldn't mention his name because he didn't allow me to do that, but he is really, really gifted. He is a great professor, has a PhD, and he told me, he said, these universities in the West are colonial, imperialist institutions. They are colonial, imperialist institutions, and often our universities in the Muslim world are marching to the same drumbeat. And he said that one of the most dangerous forms of war that they are engaged in is epistemic warfare. Epistemic warfare. Now that's a big word. It's from the same root as epistemology. It means how we get knowledge. The warfare about how we get knowledge, how we know what we know. Islamic theology begins with epistemic teachings, epistemology. How do you know the truth? What is intellect? What can intellect do? How do you use experience? What does experience mean? Like science, like our sister said. I didn't answer her question well yesterday, by the way, but we talked about that a little bit tonight. Science can investigate these things of Fitra. Once you know it's there, then you can look for it, and you can make design experiments to do that. And I know that a lot of you in medicine and other things, you already could say, oh, well, we found this, it's amazing. But epistemic warfare is essentially when we say that we, the West, have a epistemological tradition that generates knowledge. I mean, look, we put a man on the moon. Didn't we fly you here to the airport? Okay, and then people like you Muslims, we can make you a beautiful museum. We can respect you in a museum, but you cannot generate knowledge. Your tradition cannot generate knowledge. That is a declaration of epistemic warfare. And they don't just do it to us. They do it to the Hindus, they do it to the Buddhists, they maybe not so much to the Buddhists, they do it to others, especially to the First Nations of the world. Like, say, the Aboriginal people of Australia. These people who were treated by the Europeans when they came to Australia not as slaves, not as servants, not even as animals, basically like plants. That if we like this tree, we'll keep it. If we want to prune it, we can do that. If we want to cut it down, we can. They were treated like plants. And I mean, these are people who have a tradition that is the oldest we know on the earth. And if you get to know about them, you will say that, God, this generates incredible knowledge. They know things about what oils are healthy for you and what oils are not. They know things like, they will say, you talk about health, but we don't talk about health. We talk about healing, because you've got to heal yourself every day from the negativity that you've taken in. Is that not intelligent? Is that not wise? They tell people to learn to be silent and listen to your mother talk, which is the earth. What does your mother say? What does nature say? What does your nature say? This is why also in defending our tradition, which we really have to do, this is epistemic jihad. That no, we have a tradition that generates knowledge. And in fact, generates it better than yourselves. That's what I believe. And I don't believe that just because, I love Islam. I believe that on the basis of study. And these great thinkers that we had in Islamic tradition. So this is very, very important. And this is also part of that answer. And we're actually out of time, but we still have these questions. Inshallah, we can come back to them tomorrow. Thank you again for coming. Inshallah, we have no class tomorrow. Tomorrow I have to go to a wedding. And then we'll meet you again on Monday. I hope you'll be able to make it. It's an honor to have you here. And then Tuesday will be our last class. On Monday we're going to go back now to other verses and hadith, mostly verses that talk about the Fitra, and that give us a lot of the details of how rich it is. Allahumma wafiqna lima tuhibbuhu wa tarda, waj'alna min abidika as-su'ada, wa amitna ala kalimati al-huda, alimna ma yanfa'una, wa wafiqna lil-amali bima 'alamtana bih, waj'al ma nahnu fihi خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. See you on Monday, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum.